Okay, so today we're going to cover 3.5, the Marshall Court. In order for students to evaluate the importance of the Marshall Court, you're going to analyze 3 different cases. So just some fun facts about the Supreme Court. You do not have to write this down. This is just something fun. Question number 1. What is the highest court in the land? It is the basketball court that is above the Supreme Court. That is the picture you see right there to the right-hand side. If you go into the Supreme Court, there is an actual basketball court right above the court that the justices do use, as well as some of their law clerks. Question number 2. Are pickles a fruit or a vegetable? According to a case heard by the U.S. Supreme Court, pickles are what we call fruit of the vine. So they are a fruit. They're a fruit of the vine, according to the U.S. Supreme Court. And 3, where did the Supreme Court hold its first sessions until there was a space built in the old Senate chambers? So in a bar. The Supreme Court actually used to meet inside of a bar before they had their own space to meet. So just some fun things about the Supreme Court. Again, you don't have to write this down. It's just something fun to know. The Marshall Court. John Marshall, pictured to the right, was the 4th Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court. He was known for strengthening the power of the Supreme Court, and he did this using 3 court cases. The first being Marbury v. Madison, the second, McCulloch v. Maryland, and the third, Gibbons v. Ogden. In the first case, Marbury v. Madison, essentially what happened was Marbury was given a post, and it was never delivered to him. So he ended up taking the government to court. And you're going to read a little bit more about that here this afternoon, but I wanted to let you guys know a little bit more about Marbury versus Madison. It was one of the most important cases of all time. And the reason why it was one of the most important cases of all time isn't really because of Marbury or of Madison or because of the case necessarily itself. It's because of what John Marshall, the Supreme Court Justice, decided. So as he was listening to the case, and as the Supreme Court was listening to the case, they essentially determined what's now known as judicial review. And that means that the Supreme Court gets to decide what is and what is not constitutional. They interpret the Constitution to determine what it means, and they will stop the executive and legislative branches from going against the Constitution. So essentially what was happening here was the executive branch was going against the Constitution. And so because of that, the Supreme Court was able to rule whether or not that was constitutional. They determined it was not constitutional and therefore established the principle of judicial review, and the fact that they now have the power to determine if the other branches are doing something constitutional. This is a type of checks and balances. The second case is McCulloch versus Maryland. Congress established a federal bank, and when they did that, they put one of these branches in Baltimore. Baltimore did not want it. They did not want that branch there, so therefore they decided they were going to tax the bank. Well, then this got brought to the Supreme Court to see whether or not that was legal. Could the Constitution allow for Congress to build a bank? The Supreme Court said yes, it is. It's necessary and proper for them to do so, so therefore they have the right to do that. This way they have money in order to handle situations. However, the second question was, if the state bank, if Congress had permission to do this, could the state tax the bank since it was part of the federal government? And the Supreme Court ruled no, that federal law is the supreme law of the land. So 2 things happened here. First thing that happened was that the Constitution can give powers that is necessary and proper. So if it's not directly stated, it can still be a necessary and proper power, and therefore the Supreme Court decides it. The second part was that the federal government is the supreme law of the land. The third case, Gibbons versus Ogden. This was an argument over the rights to operate steamboats in New York and New Jersey, so 2 separate states. So where do those rights lie? The issue was, does the federal government have the power to regulate commerce, business activity, inside of a state? So if it's something that's happening inside of a state, does the federal government get to control that? The Supreme Court said yes, it does. And that's because of the Supremacy Clause. The laws of the federal government are superior to the laws of the state. So if the laws of the federal government say that they can, then that overrules any law of the state, and therefore they can do it. And because of these three cases is how John Marshall was able to extend his power.